Imagine you're enjoying your morning routine, perhaps sipping coffee, while watching the world wake up outside your window. You notice something subtle beginning to unfold, tiny white crystals descending from the gray sky above. At first, there's just one delicate flake that lands silently on the pavement. Then, another follows. And another dot. You continue your peaceful observation, not particularly focused on counting or analyzing what's happening. The gentle accumulation continues for hours, each individual crystal finding its place among the growing collection on the ground. At some moment, you can't pinpoint exactly when you suddenly realize you're looking at what anyone would call a pile of snow. This simple observation opens the door to one of philosophy's most intriguing puzzles: at precisely which moment did scattered individual flakes transform into what we confidently label a pile? Was it the 7th flake? The 100th? The 1000th? Could any single addition possibly represent the magical threshold between not a pile and definitely a pile? This everyday scenario illustrates what philosophers call the Sorites Paradox, named after the ancient Greek word soros, meaning heap. The puzzle reveals something profound about how our minds organize reality and how language attempts to capture the fluid, continuous nature of existence within discrete categories. Consider the logical trap this creates. If one snowflake clearly doesn't constitute a pile, then adding just one more shouldn't suddenly create one either. After all, how could a single flake make such a dramatic categorical difference? Following this reasoning, 2 flakes also fail to qualify as a pile, neither do 3, 4, or 5. This logical chain continues indefinitely, suggesting that no collection of individual flakes, regardless of size, could ever truly become a pile. Yet, we all know piles of snow exist. We see them, walk around them, and shovel them from our driveways. The paradox emerges from the collision between our logical reasoning and our direct experience of the world, dos. This isn't merely an academic exercise about snow. The same vagueness haunts almost every category we use to navigate reality. When does a child become an adult? When does a democracy become authoritarian? When does a collection of cells become a living organism? When does a group of notes become music? These questions lead us into deeper philosophical territory known as the problem of universals. This ancient debate examines how we determine what makes different things fundamentally similar, and whether the qualities we use for classification have genuine existence beyond our mental constructs. Picture yourself sitting on a wooden chair while pondering these questions. Now imagine 3 identical chairs across the room. Same manufacturer, same green paint, same dimensions, same design. In everyday conversation, you'd naturally refer to all 4 as the same chair, yet each occupies distinct space, consists of entirely different wood molecules, and has its own unique history of scratches, wear, and use. What exactly do we mean when we say they're the same? Each chair represents what philosophers call a particular, a specific, concrete object existing in time and space. But the chairness that they all share, along with their common greenness, represents what philosophers call universals, abstract properties that can be present in multiple objects simultaneously. This creates a fascinating puzzle. How can completely different objects possess identical properties? If each chair is genuinely unique, what justifies grouping them under the same category? And if we say they share certain qualities, do those qualities minus chairness, greenness, smoothness, have their own independent existence in reality? Throughout history, thinkers have proposed 3 main solutions to this puzzle. Realists argue that universal properties, like chairness and greenness, genuinely exist as independent features of reality. This perspective traces back to Plato's theory of forms, which proposed 2 levels of existence: the physical world we perceive through our senses, and a higher realm of perfect, unchanging ideas, or forms. According to this view, every green chair participates in the eternal form of greenness and the eternal form of chair. These forms are more real and permanent than any particular chair, which will eventually break, fade, or decay. Nominalists take the opposite stance, arguing that universals are merely convenient labels we create for communication. In this view, there's no actual chairness floating around in reality. Just individual chairs that we group together because it's useful for practical purposes. The similarities we perceive are products of our pattern-seeking minds, rather than genuine features of the external world. Conceptualists occupy middle ground, suggesting that universals exist within our mental frameworks, but not in the external world. They're real as cognitive structures that help us organize experience, but they don't have independent existence beyond conscious minds that create and use them. Each approach offers insights while raising new questions. If universals don't exist independently, how do we explain the remarkable consistency with which different people recognize the same patterns? If they do exist independently, where exactly are they located, and how do physical objects participate in abstract forms? These questions about classification and properties connect to an even more fundamental puzzle about identity over time. The ancient philosophical thought experiment, known as the Ship of Theseus, illustrates this beautifully. According to legend, after the hero Theseus returned from slaying the Minotaur in Crete, the grateful Athenians preserved his ship as a monument. To maintain this treasure, they replaced worn or damaged parts with identical new components. Over decades and centuries, every original plank, sail, rope and nail was eventually replaced. The question that has puzzled philosophers for millennia, is the fully restored ship still the same vessel that carried Theseus on his heroic journey? Most people initially feel that replacing one plank shouldn't change the ship's fundamental identity, nor should replacing the second plank, or the third. But if we accept this reasoning, we must conclude that a ship sharing zero original components somehow remains the same ship. The puzzle deepens when we consider variations. What if someone collected all the discarded original parts and reassembled them into another ship? Which vessel would be the real Ship of Theseus? What if Theseus himself used both ships? What if the restoration happened over 5 years instead of 5 centuries? Would that change our intuition? This thought experiment reveals our uncertainty about what philosophers call the persistence of identity. In a world of constant change, what makes anything remain itself over time? Your body completely replaces its cells every 7 to 10 years, yet you consider yourself the same person. Organizations replace all their employees, yet we speak of institutional continuity. Rivers flow with entirely different water molecules, yet we name them as permanent geographical features. These philosophical puzzles aren't merely abstract intellectual games. They reveal something profound about how human consciousness interfaces with reality. Our minds excel at creating useful categories, boundaries, and identities that help us navigate an incredibly complex world. We effortlessly recognize faces, predict behavior, plan for the future, and coordinate with others, all based on our ability to identify patterns and maintain consistent concepts over time. Yet when we examine these mental tools closely, their foundations appear surprisingly fragile. The certainty we feel about clear-cut categories dissolves under careful analysis. The boundaries we take for granted prove to be arbitrary constructions rather than discoveries about the fundamental structure of reality. This recognition carries practical implications. Many of our most destructive social problems stem from treating flexible categories as rigid, absolute truths. When we forget that concepts like race, nationality, gender roles, and political ideologies are human constructions rather than natural facts, we become vulnerable to prejudice, stereotyping, and binary thinking. Understanding the provisional nature of our conceptual frameworks can cultivate intellectual humility. If even simple categories, like heap and same chair, prove problematic under examination, how much confidence should we place in more complex classifications about human nature, social organization, or moral values? Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these philosophical puzzles is that they coexist with the obvious practical success of human categorization. Despite the theoretical problems with concepts like heap, chair, and same, we use these categories millions of times daily with remarkable effectiveness. We communicate complex ideas, build sophisticated technologies, create beautiful art, and solve intricate problems, minds, all while relying on conceptual tools that philosophy reveals to be fundamentally uncertain. This suggests that the value of our mental categories lies not in their perfect correspondence to reality, but in their practical utility for human purposes. A category doesn't need rigid boundaries to be useful. It just needs to help us accomplish our goals in specific contexts. Consider how a biologist, an artist, and a furniture maker might categorize the same collection of objects differently, each using the classification system that serves their particular needs. The biologist might focus on materials and manufacturing processes, the artist on aesthetic properties and cultural meanings, the furniture maker on structural integrity and functional specifications. None of these approaches is correct in an absolute sense, but each can be more or less useful for specific purposes. This perspective on categories and concepts offers a path toward greater intellectual flexibility. When we remember that our classifications are tools rather than discoveries, we become more willing to modify them when they stop serving us well. We become less attached to defending particular definitions and more interested in understanding the different ways people organize their experience. This flexibility becomes especially valuable in our increasingly complex, interconnected world. Traditional categories often prove inadequate for addressing challenges that span multiple domains: climate change, artificial intelligence, global economics, cultural hybridization. These issues require the ability to think fluidly across conventional boundaries rather than defending rigid categorical distinctions. The ancient paradoxes also remind us that uncertainty isn't a problem to be solved, but a fundamental feature of the human condition. Our knowledge will always be partial, our categories imperfect, our identities fluid. Rather than finding this troubling, we might view it as liberating. If our current understanding is necessarily incomplete, there's always room for growth, discovery, and creative reimagining. As we return to the image of snowflakes accumulating outside your window, the philosophical journey reveals something beautiful about human consciousness. We live suspended between the concrete particularity of individual snowflakes and the abstract universality of concepts like heap. Neither level captures the complete truth, but together they enable the rich, nuanced experience we call understanding. The snowflakes continue falling, each unique in its crystalline structure, each finding its place in the growing accumulation. At some unmeasurable moment, scattered individuals become a collective whole. The boundary remains invisible, the transformation unmarked by ceremony, yet something genuinely new emerges from the process. This is perhaps the deepest lesson of these ancient paradoxes. Reality is far more fluid, creative, and mysterious than our everyday concepts suggest. The categories we use to navigate the world are simultaneously essential and provisional, powerful and limited, clarifying and obscuring. In the end, the greatest wisdom might lie not in resolving these paradoxes, but in learning to dance gracefully with them. We can appreciate both the practical necessity of our conceptual frameworks and their fundamental uncertainty. We can use categories as tools while remembering they are constructions. We can maintain our identities while acknowledging their fluidity. The snow continues falling, accumulating according to patterns both predictable and surprising. Each flake matters and doesn't matter, belongs and remains separate, creates change and preserves continuity. In watching this simple process, we glimpse something essential about the nature of existence itself, endlessly particular, endlessly universal, endlessly paradoxical, endlessly beautiful. Through embracing rather than solving these fundamental uncertainties, we open ourselves to a more flexible, compassionate, and wonder-filled way of engaging with the complexity of being human in an infinitely mysterious universe.